climate change affects people disproportionately, and often when people are talking about climate change and talking about global warming and the issues that can be fixed, a lot of the voices that are listened to are of those who come from a very privileged position. Yeah, so I'm Ruby, I'm 16, and I'm in year 11. And I mainly work in the sectors of climate justice and gender equality and gender justice. So I've been working with School Strike for the past 2.5 years. And I've had a lot of other opportunities to organise some other programs, which has been really great. Yeah, so this was a panel that I got invited to speak on, and I was just kind of representing the collective youth voice, and it was about the intersection between climate justice and gender equality. So it was basically talking about how there's a lot of intersectionality within the climate justice movement, and how, you know, climate change affects people disproportionately, and often when people are talking about climate change and talking about global warming and the issues that can be fixed, a lot of the voices that are listened to are of those who come from a very privileged position. And so that's kind of what the conference was about, and just kind of dissecting what we can do about climate change and how kind of gender equality falls into this. So I joined School Strike for Climate after I participated in the strike in 2019. I just went with some friends from school, and they were handing out flyers that was like, join us. So I decided to sign up on the website. And after a few months, I got onboarded. So when I was onboarded, there weren't that many people that were currently active. So I kind of had to take on some positions that were very new to me, such as onboarding new people, even though I just joined. And I was mainly working in the Sydney space. However, as time went on, a lot of the people that I was talking to within School Strike, the friends that I had made, also worked in the national space, and that kind of really interested me. So I then joined the national space probably at the beginning of 2021, and I was able to help organise the Sydney strike in May of 2021, and was given the absolutely amazing opportunity to MC that strike. And I also helped organise one of the other ones that we had in March, and then in October of 2021, and then the two that we had this year in March and in May. So yeah, but working as a national organiser isn't only about strikes, but about collaborating with unions and businesses to try and get their opinions on the climate crisis, and for them to try and uplift young people's voices, which most of them are really collaborative with. So that's amazing. Yeah, so we have a lot of great connections, especially in the Sydney school strike, with unions like the Maritime Union, the Teachers Union. I can't think of any of the rest of my head, but off the top of my head, but we've been able to participate in strikes with them. So for example, we had a contingent for a school strike at some of the New South Wales Teachers Federation strikes. And this also means that they are very supportive of our strikes and helping us get any resources that we might need. So for example, there's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes into organising a strike. And having some adults to help with that, or people who have experience, because a lot of union workers do have a lot of experience with organising strikes and going through the whole process, is really helpful. And the Maritime Union in particular has lent us a lot of their spaces and some of their physical resources, like helping us get a stage for our strikes and all of that. So just having that extra added support and then being able to collaborate on any issues that they're concerned on is it's really useful. The best and most ultimate thing is legislation, because ultimately nothing happens without legislation, unfortunately. But in order for that to kind of happen, it's mainly listening to the people, because that is ultimately the government's role, or it should be the government's role. But unfortunately, especially in the climate sector and a lot of other social justice issues, people's voices get shut down, especially young people and especially marginalized groups. So really the first thing that the government needs to do in order to act on climate change is to listen to what we are saying and what young people are saying, because it is our future and it's an issue for us. And it might not seem like an issue now, but with all of the natural disasters that have been happening, the fires and the floods, which have just like completely ruined people's lives, it's undeniable that things are happening and they're going to impact us a lot sooner than we ever predicted. And so really just listening to what we have to say, because while we may not be scientists, we do listen to what scientists say, and we do know what they're saying, and we're not just making these things up. So there's a lot of, just listening to young people and listening to marginalized communities, especially in Australia, First Nations voices, because ultimately First Nations people are disproportionately affected by climate change. And, there's so many coal and gas projects which take place on stolen Indigenous land and, have never been approved by the First Nations people of that land, even though, they've pushed away their voices and tried to make proposals where they don't have to listen to the First Nations voices, which is it's disgraceful, And so, yeah, listening to young people will actually make the government realize that something needs to happen. And then the best thing that they can do is listen to what we're saying, which is to listen to the science and trust the science and enact legislation that ultimately does good things for our planet, and listen to First Nations voices and other marginalized communities. So really great question. The strikes themselves were really disrupted by COVID, because we couldn't have strikes anymore. And that is ultimately the whole purpose of our organization. And so even our communications were disrupted because we couldn't have in-person meetings, and meetings on Zoom are just not the same. And it's really hard to meet with people from other businesses when you're colliding with like school hours and business hours, and then like when people are available. So what we kind of did was we organized a few online actions. We had a big online strike in October of 2021, and this was a statewide online strike, so New South Wales. So we had a lot of people from regional areas talking at this online strike. And we did get a lot of people in attendance. The Zoom literally almost broke down because there were so many people there, and it was quite glitchy, but it was really impactful, because one thing that's quite hard to do at in-person strikes is to get people to take action right then and there. Whereas on online strike, we had about 5 or 10 minutes where people could make calls to parliamentary offices and comment on politicians' Instagram, so much that I think the comments on Scott Morrison's, one of his posts on Instagram, got shut off because so many people commenting like, do something about climate action now, it's really necessary. But we definitely were impacted, and it was a really hard time for many people in the environment movement and so many other social justice movements. Even outside of school strike, some of the other organizations that I work with were just really struggling to make any action at all because everyone was so focused on COVID. But unfortunately, COVID and climate change, they kind of go hand in hand. There are like environmental factors that contribute to infectious diseases being spread. And also, we actually saw a positive kind of impact from COVID in a way that less people driving and less people taking trains and everything. And now that, our lives are kind of back to normal in the sense that we're going out, that kind of has reversed. So I think, it gave politicians a way to be like, oh, look, everything's improving, everything's fine. When really it actually just showed that if we actually do take action, things will be okay and things will get better. And it's not just something that we hope for. It's something that will happen. China saw a massive decrease in their emissions because no one was out at all when they had very, very strict lockdowns and no one was using cars or anything. So they saw a massive decrease in pollution, which was fantastic. But now, of course, it's back up to somewhat normal. And so it's back up there. But I think a really important thing to take into consideration when you're kind of thinking about online organizing and online mobilization is that the message isn't any less important through online communication. It just has to be communicated in quite a different way, because it's really hard to get very passionate and somewhat aggressive online because it's just through a screen. You can't kind of make the same impact that you would be if you were yelling something out in the streets at a protest and disrupting actual politicians like officers or, you know, protesting outside of state parliament. Instead, you're just kind of, you know, trying to get your online message. But the main thing is just like cooperation from just everyone, I guess. It's hard to kind of mitigate what's happening, but ultimately the online response depends on the people who are listening. And so if people are willing to, you know, communicate through social media, which many people are, there are certainly ways of making it work. It just takes a lot more time and effort and planning. That's very valid. I mean, there's so much COVID going around at the moment with like the scare factor of another possible wave. Like it's just a lot of people don't want to go out, and that's completely understandable. There are so many things you can do from home that include like emailing politicians and calling up their offices. This is especially good if, I mean, it's good at all times, but it's especially good if it's part of an organized action, because that means that politicians get kind of flooded, and it's, you know, it's more impactful. So sometimes when there's rallies or strikes, there'll always kind of be like an online option, and there'll be lots of people calling at the time that the strike is actually happening. And another way is to basically just advertise the strike and try and get as many people involved, even if you're not going, or possibly even holding your own strike. So I know that some people at their schools held their own strikes at school because that was just their own school community. And they kind of talked about what they wanted their school to achieve and how they could contribute to, you know, whatever their goal was, lessening waste or emissions or electricity use. And so that's a really positive way if you're a student to try and get some action, is to try and get your school on board. But if you are going to a protest, wearing a mask and trying to stay as distant as possible. A lot of people think of like all the school strike protests as really, really massive protests, but there are rallies that are happening all the time, which are kind of more centralized around one particular issue. And those are really good to go to if you're a bit worried about lots of people being there, because often there's more space to kind of spread out. So there sometimes are quite a few people there, like a few hundred people, but you're able to kind of distance yourself maybe across the road or just like down a bit from wherever they're rallying, because just of the way that those kind of rallies work. So that's a really effective way, but just wearing a mask and wearing hand sanitizer, not attending if you're sick, obviously, because, you know, you never know. Rat tests are like pretty untrustable. And so, yeah, that's just kind of the way that it works, and listening to what the organizers say, because they've probably put some protocols in place, and just following those, trust me, makes their lives a lot easier. Yeah. So I love volunteering personally, and it's something that I have to do for school. But I genuinely do really love kind of being able to help people. And my passion for climate change started when I was very young. I grew up in the Blue Mountains, and just for the first few years of my life. But even then, there was a constant fear of evacuation because of bushfires. And once I became a bit older, I kind of realized that that wasn't just because bushfires were a thing that happened, that was because of climate change. And I still had a lot of friends at the time who lived in the Blue Mountains and had to evacuate from fires and floods constantly. And it kind of just, I don't know, it just struck a chord with me. Like, why is nothing being done on this? if it keeps getting worse and worse and everyone's kind of aware about it. It's not like climate change is some issue that no one knows about. It is quite prominent in society, thankfully, but there's still a lot of ignorance about it. And I watched a few documentaries, especially ones, a few good books by Greta Thunberg and Vanessa Nakate. There was some books that really inspired me about how just like advocating for something can make all much more of the change. Even if you don't really contribute that much as an individual to, like, I don't know, not putting plastic in your lunchbox. I mean, that's a great step to take, but it's not available for everyone. And so advocating is one of the most important things you could do. And that's when I became really passionate about climate change, and through that. And then volunteering with organizations such as ACF, with just kind of organizations that I found out about through my work with School Strike, and wanted to take some like grassroots action. So I haven't worked with ACF for very long, but I do work within my local community. And so just kind of like organizing things that are relevant to my community, which is quite nice. Considering that School Strike is a lot more about our national issues and even our issues as a state. Whereas when I'm working in like the Inner West working group, we can kind of talk about what's happening with like the trees getting cut down to build new apartments, or the light rail, developments. And that's kind of a lot more relevant to my community. And then I have done some work with disability, working with teaching kids how to swim, disabled kids, which I recently started doing, and is an honestly amazing experience. I know some people with a disability, and it just seems really unfair to me that they don't get the same opportunities. And even though I do believe that, options for swimming lessons and other activities should be available through normal programs for disabled children, unfortunately, that's not the case. So I kind of thought, why not as well help out where I can while that kind of issue is being fixed. And it's been really great. I've learned a lot of things, and I hope to find more places to volunteer in the future around that. Yeah. I would say small steps is the best start, because kind of throwing yourself into a new experience, especially if it's a new kind of organization or a new kind of issue that you've never really had experience with before. Like I'd never done any volunteering around disabilities before a few years ago. And so it seemed quite daunting to kind of start and being like, okay, I have to teach kids how to swim. That's a big step. But small steps and doing your research is the best step. I think a lot of people have this idea that when they're volunteering, they need to be helping, doing kind of like targeting as many issues as possible. That's not really true. I think the best thing is to find an issue that you're passionate about and that resonates with you. And the best way to do that is just kind of look around at the world and think, what makes me really angry and really sad? Because anger isn't always the best emotion, but it does provide a lot of fuel, and it does provide a lot of passion. And so if you can kind of look around and go, what makes me angry in this world? What do I want to change? And then start from there. And your actions with volunteering, they don't have to be massive. It could literally be picking up rubbish. If that's something that you're interested in, you think, oh, there's a lot of litter, or it could be as simple as helping kids out at your school who might have trouble with something or who need mentoring for a certain program. And from there, if you want to, that provides more space to grow, because you meet people and they tell you about things that are happening, and they can help you grow other skills, and then you can kind of go on in your journey if you want to. But I think there's a lot of stigma in a sense of like, you have to do everything, and you have to volunteer at all these places, and you have to like be kind of like do a lot of broad things to be, I don't know, the best person, quote unquote. But that's really not true. Even one action that's just like that's amazing for anyone to do, because you're helping someone, you're taking time out of your lives, which for many school students in particular is very busy. And wanting to help someone like that in itself is a really commendable action. So it can be a very overwhelming experience, but once you really get in there, if you're just kind of like taking small steps, it really gets a lot easier, and it kind of just becomes natural. And that's something that I really enjoy. um, I think my message would be to stick to your values, and find something that really angers you, that empowers you. Something, having an issue that you can kind of cling on to, and that you can learn more about and research more about, will open up so many more opportunities. Because, as I mentioned before, it always seems like you need to be doing everything and covering every issue. But just because you kind of do work in one sector doesn't mean you don't care about anything else. And actually finding that issue that you're passionate about, and finding that passion, is not it doesn't mean that you're stuck there forever, and it will take you to many other opportunities if you work hard, and if you want to. And so just sticking with what you're going with, and being confident in it, because the world is daunting, and there are so many issues in the world right now that it is really overwhelming, especially for young people, thinking, oh my God, my future, we're doomed. That's certainly a thought that probably a lot of young people have had. But I think finding that one thing that you're passionate about, that one thing that lights a spark within you, is just really important, and it can bring you to so many different places, meet so many new people, bring you to so many opportunities. And it really, once you get in there, it really does feel like you're making a difference. And it's really just an amazing feeling that I would recommend to everyone.